Kumlen and a block tomorrow. Today's block is actually tomorrow. The block today's Ches Amid Aleph, and just we are trying to figure out still why we need a special pasuk, the word Aleha, to tell us that if your brother passed away childless and his wife happens to be your wife's sister, that you should not be able to marry her. Why would we have thought you could? So first we had the whole discussion about Esed, but we said that it doesn't do it to a Bakaris. So we gave a new reason, Ishter, because something which is forbidden was already became permitted. Perhaps it pulls in its train also other things which are prohibited that it should become permitted. And we brought a precedent for it, Amid Seira. On the second turn, after the 7 clean days, he goes to the mikveh, and then they bring 3 different sacrifices: a chatas, an oila, and an osham. And that particular osham is unique. That he is considered a mechusik kippurim. That means he didn't bring his kabbanas yet, even though he went to the mikveh. He's sunset. He's a mechusik kippurim. A mechusik kippurim is not allowed to enter that part of the region of the Beis Hamikdash, which is the Machane Shechin, the Beis Hamikdash itself. He cannot go from Ezaz Yisrael, the courtyard for male Israelis, but he could go into the Ezaz Noshim, and he goes to the Shah Nikanor. But even though he goes in that gate which wasn't consecrated, he's sticking his thumbs in. Now, Amid Seder also, Amid Seder, in fact, can't go to Yerushalayim, but Amid Seder definitely cannot go into the intersection of the Beis Hamikdash. But the Torah made a special dispensation. He can put his thumbs in because they take the blood of the carbon ashram and they sprinkle it on his earlobe and his right thumb and his right toe. And even though generally speaking, be a b'mikzah shmei mikzahs, when we say you're not allowed to enter a certain region of the Beis Hamikdash, let's say a tamei mace cannot enter into the machane shechina, even just the one finger is forbidden. By Mitzvah, we made a special dispensation, obviously, that he can. What happened? He became a keddy, and suddenly he saw a keddy, which is that he went, he admitted on a mission. So then he's coming for the day. He has to go to mikveh, and he needs to wait for sunset. So he's called a tavul yaim. Now tavul yaim, which we learned before, is considered a shein of the tumah, but tavul yaim b'derabbanan, we learned from Yoshafat, b'derabbanan cannot walk into the section of the Ezras Noshim either, and the whole Temple Mount. But the Rabbanan said in this case, because the Korban Pesach has to be brought on that day, that his 8th day is the day of the Korban Pesach, we're going to let him walk in so that he can become Tahir. Now, so he's still Mechusik Yippurim. He cannot bring the Korban Pesach until he becomes Tahir. So he brings that carbon. So he has to finish the process, which is with the ashram that has to be sprayed on his fingers. So we say, since we permit a mitzvah, even though you shouldn't put your fingers into the machane shechina, into the Beis Hamikdash, but we permit a mitzvah to put his toe in and his right thumb in order that he should become tahir. So it drags along with it also this balkari who shouldn't. We're going to push away the issur of going into the Ezras Noshim because only the Rabbanon we want to bring Korban Pesach. But how can he put balkari is not allowed to put in his thumbs or anything else into the Beis Hamikdash area, but we're going to allow that because since we allow the material, we also allow the balkari. So we see clearly from here that hoil ishter. Okay, that's what the Gemara said. We're on top of the page, and the Gemara is going to ask. It's not exactly the same thing. How can you compare to ula? And that is as follows: in the case of the mitzvah, first you're a mitzvah. I'm just going to give you the details so you understand how the Gemara is going to make all these contrasts. In the case of Mitzvah, you were Mitzvah, later on you became a Bakari. Not only you became a Bakari later on, by the time you became a Bakari, you already finished your Tzaras. You finished your Torah, you already went to the mikveh, you already had your sunset. It's now in the morning, you're on the way to the Beis Hamikdash, you became a Bakari. Or in the morning, you're preparing and you became a Bakari. So by the time you became a Bakari, you're almost completely Torah from your Tzaras. And then you became a Balkari, and then we say when you complete the Tzaras, it also pulls in with it, gets rid of the Balkari. And we're going to say that if you draw and assimilate to the case of your sister-in-law, it's very limited, very narrow cases, examples that are similar to the Torah. And that is as follows. Top of the page. Teinach. Okay. It makes sense. First, Reuben married your sister. If Reuben married, let's say, your sister-in-law, your wife's sister, but it wasn't your wife yet. So at that time, she was totally mutter to you. And then you married afterwards. So which Issa came first? First came the Issa of your brother's wife, and then later on was added the Issa of your wife's sister. The Migu the Isha. So when your brother dies, and since the Issa of your brother's wife became permitted, which was first, it pulls in it within its train. So therefore, we would have thought that maybe also your wife's sister should be permitted. Fine. But if Nosachai, if you married this woman first, and this woman was already, her sister was already also to you first, and then your brother married her. So because your brother died, and as far as a brother's wife is concerned, it became permitted. There's nothing. It cannot pull into a train an issa that preceded it. The fact that it's your wife's sister, then it wouldn't be comparable to the case of Mitzvah. But and then afterwards, let's say Reuven married this woman, so he added another layer, which is your brother's wife. So which issa was first? The fact that it's the sister of my wife. So it cannot be pulled in train. And let's go further. I'll narrow it down even further. Even if Reuven, let's say, married her first, so the first issa that came about was your brother's wife. Nami Teinach, it makes sense if you want to compare it to Mitzvah, because remember the case of Mitzvah, you already finished your tzaras before the second issa came along. Reuven married this woman who later turned out to be your wife's sister. At the time, it wasn't. So the only issa you have now is your brother's wife. And then your brother died, the issa of your brother's wife is sort of gone, and now she's already attached to one of the brothers that she has to marry. And then only afterwards, when it's almost totally, in fact, it's mutter to you already, you're allowed to marry her right now. But you didn't. And then suddenly you married her sister. So the next issa came along now when that one was already mutter. So then it makes sense that since you're going to continue with that one, it mattered the other one. The chazile, the bein, since this woman is already permitted to you, so you already have a heter ready, so therefore it's mattered the second issa, like Matzaras. But if Nasa Mace, Veloy Mace, if Reuven married this woman, so she became your brother's wife, also to you, but he didn't die yet, and sometime later you married her sister, so now you have another layer. Now they're both Isser concurrently, also the two Isser now concurrently. Then Shimon, let's say, married the woman who was a sister. So there was never a moment that Reuven's wife was permitted to you. First was Reuven's wife, and then you had another later being the sister of your wife. Mila Moida Ula, wouldn't Ula be made in the case of Taras? What happens if you became about Kerry, not on the morning of the 8th day, but on the night of the 8th, when you were never ready to bring that carbon in the first place? Then Ula would be made that we don't say that because you're allowed to walk in as a matur and put your thumbs in, we're going to allow you also about Kerry, because you weren't yet ready for Matzorah to be tired. It doesn't play anything in train yet. If you saw Kelly the night of the 8th, you cannot put your thumb in because there was never a moment that you were yet suitable to bring a carbon to say that it's sort of Taras is almost, is tired already in theory, and you sort of being the Kabbalah is already tired in theory, and therefore, since you're allowed to do that, it also permits you to do the Balkari to walk in there as well. But it's only if it's during the day you're already row, but at night you weren't, it doesn't help. Same thing here. So we're narrowing down the window. If you want to compare the case of your brother's wife, which happens to be your wife's sister, is a very narrow case similar to Matzera. Only if your brother married her first, then your brother died. So now you're allowed to marry your brother's wife, and then you married her sister. So because you're allowed to marry your brother's wife, and it was an usher that was permitted. So now, since that permission came before the new Issa came along, therefore it prevents the Issa from falling in the first place. It's much easier to prevent an Issa from happening than once the Issa fell to remove it. So therefore, by Matzaras, because something was usher to walk in the base of English, but it became permitted, so it prevents also the Keri from making it usher. Same thing here. Since your brother's wife is forbidden to you, and then it became permitted, we permitted something which is usher, and this happened before the next layer that this woman should be usher to you because you're your wife's sister, it could prevent it from becoming usher. But once it becomes usher, it doesn't really matter. So we'll go back to the question. So why do we need a pasuk to tell you that you do not marry your wife's sister if it happens to be married to your brother? Why would you think you could? Timur says, I'll tell you why. In this very narrow case. You're exactly right. We need the pasuk exactly for this very narrow case, which is the Nasa Mace. Reuben married her, and she's also to you as a brother's wife. The Mace, and then your brother died. So this woman that was also became permitted, and the Achikach Nasachai, and then you married a sister, and now we want to add another, even though this woman was also before, but then it became permitted. Now you want to create a new Issa. The fact that she became permitted to marry you, and it's a mitzvah, prevents the other Issa from happening. That's one. So that's what the whole pasuk is for. Or give another answer. But I'll tell you another reason why we need a pasuk, not just in that narrow case, but generally. And why is that? Not because of Ishtre, but is Asya behekeshem with Rabbi Yehuda. We use it because we have a hekesh of Rabbi Yehuda that compares all the arayas to each other. And had not been for Allah, we would have thought that all arayas is married to your brother once it's permitted as a brother's wife. All other arayas become permitted as well. And that is what? Well, let's say wife's sister. I would have thought your wife's sister is permitted because of the hekesh of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says the pasuk. Anybody does any of these abominations, the nichasu. It says kol ha. So we're comparing all these different abominations together. All the arayas are compared to each other, and there he uses to teach the halacha that the avera of living with any one of these ervas is not just when you consummate it, but even if you just start having intimacy is already forbidden. And you can compare all the arayas to each other. So too, if we're comparing all the arayas to each other, we should compare it also to your wife, to your husband's wife. And just like your husband's wife is forbidden to you, but then it becomes permitted when he dies. So all other arayas should become permitted to you as well, because of this hekesh that we use for other laws. You can say very simply, your brother's wife has only one avera. Your brother's wife, who happens to be your wife's sister, has two averas. It's your brother's wife and your wife's sister. When it comes to a hekesh, you can't ask questions on a hekesh. A logical question on a hekesh. Hekesh is not a logical thing. The Torah put it there specifically to compare them all together and don't ask questions on logic. So therefore, we would have thought to compare all the arayas. That's why we need Allah to tell you that no, that a sister, the pasuk is talking about your wife's sister. Your wife's sister is forbidden. Even Allah, even when there's a mitzvah, is forbidden. I would have thought Sharia, just like the Eshidach is permitted. I would have thought Avkal Arayas, also all other Arayas, equal action. We should compare the Eshidach to your brother's wife. The equal, yeah. That's what I skipped the one. Avkal Arayas Sharia permitted. Therefore, Kos Rachmana Allah. Amr Bach has an interesting question. Rav Acha to ask a question to Ravina. Let's see. So we're comparing all Arayas. From one halacha, Rabbi Yehuda says we compare all arayas, let's say, to your brother's wife. We can, and then everything will be permitted. Or we can compare all other arayas to your wife's sister. Remember, the Torah we have a pasuk, your wife's sister, Allah will tell you that no, even though she was married to your brother, now the mitzvah yibum, don't marry her. We have another pasuk that says if your brother dies childless, marry his wife. Now, the rest of the arayas, where the Torah doesn't specify what you should do, you have two choices: either compare it to your brother's wife, and therefore it should be permitted, or compare it to your wife's sister, and therefore it should be forbidden. How do we know which way to go? Says the Gemara, we can compare it to your brother's wife. We can compare it to your wife's sister. My chazis, why do you deem it fit to action? Why do you decide to compare all arayos to your wife's sister? They're forbidden, even though there's a mitzvah of yibum. Let's compare it to your brother's wife and say even though it's forbidden, but now it's permitted because there's a mitzvah of yibum. The Torah, you're right. It says clearly, but your wife's sister is forbidden. But the Torah also says that your brother's wife, which is forbidden, now is permitted. So how do we know which one to compare all the other arayos to? Answers the Gemara. I can tell you two answers. One answer is lekula v'chumra lekula makshinim. Whenever we have a choice to either go in a lenient way or in a stricter way, we'll always go the stricter way. And from here they bring a proof to the opinion that says whenever there's a doubt in the Torah, the laws we always go stricter. Who told us to go stricter? The Torah told us to go stricter, like the Rashba says, or is it the rabbis who said that if it's a question of the Torah, let's go stricter, which is the Rambam's view? The fact that the Gemara says here, whenever you have a choice to go lenient or stricter, let's take the stricter way, sounds more like the Rashba's way, that the Torah itself mandates you should go the stricter way. Or you say, I'll give you another answer. You know why we compare everything else to your wife's sister rather than your brother's wife? Your brother's wife is limited to one avera. And all other rights, if they're married to your brother, there are two averas. The fact that it's your brother's wife, plus whatever the erva is. And therefore, it's better, it makes more sense to compare a two avera thing to a two avera thing, which is your wife's sister as well. It's two averas. It's your wife's sister and your brother's wife. And therefore, we'd rather compare to that than to compare it to a single avera. That's why we're strict with all the other arrays. There's two Yisurim, and your wife's sister is two Yisurim. Therefore, we compare the two. We'll learn two from two. Only one Yisur. Two from one, we don't learn. Okay, so that's why we need the pasuk alarm, because we would have thought we would compare all other arayas to your brother's wife. Now comes along Rava gives a new answer. I'll tell you why you need why we would have thought that it is permitted. Comes along Rav and says, Rabba says, Erva Gufa like Tzricha. You're right. As far as the erva is concerned, let's say you don't need a pasuk at all. You don't need a pasuk for your wife's sister. Of course, she's usher. Just because she's married to your brother and he died and there's a mitzvah of Yibum, why would we have thought that you can marry your wife's sister? An asay is not doicha aloisasa sheyesh bar karis. The ain't asay doicha sheyesh bar karis. You don't need the pasuk aleha to tell you that we would have thought you should marry your wife's sister. I'm telling you, don't. We don't need that pasuk. Because here's an asay sheyesh it's a loises b'karis, and asay cannot push away a loises sheyesh b'karis. So what do you need to pass it for? Allah. What do you need Allah to tell you that what even though it's a mitzvah yibum, don't do it? It's a cry. You know what you need it for? Lemesa tzara. Remember, if Reuven was married to two women, one of them was your wife's sister, the other woman is a stranger. You would have thought marry the wife's the co-wife who's a stranger, the tzara. Therefore, you need a pasuk Allah to tell you that even though it's a mitzvah yibum and she personally is not asa to you, you're not allowed to marry her. So that's what you need the pasuk for. Says the Gemara, so what are you telling me? So a whole new pshat. Allah is referring to the tzara. Says the Gemara, now you tell me erva doesn't require a pasuk. Just read the wording of all the mishnahs and braysos. You'll see it seems that they all use the pasuk Allah to teach you regarding the erva itself. You would have thought you could marry her until you know. That's what we learned till now. Tanya, we learned in a particular brayso, Ainli Elahi. All we would have known is if it was regarding erva. It says like this, all we were known is that the erva is forbidden to you. How do you know the tzara? So clearly we're using the pasuk to teach you that you're not allowed to marry the erva. So it's not being pedantic. He's just leading into the tzara. It's all about the tzara. We don't need a pasuk. It's not saying that the pasuk really is only coming here to tell you about the erva. We don't know that anyway. The erva is a loises that there's karas. Why would you even think that the mitzvah even pushes away? Not at all. It says elsewhere, it says Ainli Elahain. All we know is them. Again. So again, it seems to clearly say that all we know is the erva. How do you know further? Again, Mishum Tzara saying we're leading into the tzara. It's again, not that we're actually using the pasuk to teach you about the erva. That we know automatically. You're not allowed to marry your wife's sister or your erva, whatever it is. You're not allowed to, because it's a loisesh b'karis. It's leading in. The brayso is leading into the main purpose of the pasuk, which is to teach you regarding the co-wife. That even though it's not related to you at all, because she's a co-wife of the one that is related to you, you're not allowed to marry. That's a big finish. Toshma coming here. Let's see what this following brayso says. Rebbe Omer will ask me a question. Rebbe says, it says in the pasuk, when two brothers are together, and let's say Reuben and Shimon, and Reuben passes away, and he was left childless, then this woman cannot marry a stranger until she marries her brother-in-law. And it says in the pasuk, Yevamos Daf, the brother-in-law should have a relation with her. It says Ulekacha, he should take her as a wife, and he should marry her. Now, Lekacha should take her, as opposed to what? Could have just said Velokach, he should take. Leili should take her as a wife, to him as a wife, and the Yibam, and he should marry her. The fact that it adds a hey makes it much more specific, her, and not somebody else. What is that referring to? So then he says, it says the possible Velokach. Well, it should have said Velokach. Instead it says Ulekach. The pasuk should have said Yibam. Instead it says Yibam. So what's the pasuk trying to say? Marry her and not somebody else, as opposed to somebody else. I want lesser tzoros v'arayos to come. So it's two parts of the pasuk, two risurim. One is Lekacha, take her, Yibam, marry her, to tell you that you can but you should not marry the tzara of or marry the erva. This woman you should marry, but not if she happens to be related to you. This woman you should marry, but not if she's a co-wife of someone who's related to you. Okay, so what we see clearly from Rebbe, we have two psukim. One, it says clearly one of the psukim is for erva. You said before there's no need for it. Rabbi said there's no need for it because it's only recorded. He said clearly there is a need for it. So you want to aim, you should say, you read Rebbe's words as follows: to asa tzara shel arayis. Not to asa the erva. That we don't need a pasuk. It's obvious. It's to add the co-wife of the arayis. Says the Gemara, but today he brings two parts of the pasuk. He's learning two limudim, and you're narrowing it down to one. My love, isn't it chad le'erva v'chad le'tzara? Because Rebbe is saying that two psukim, v'lekacha and v'yibma. Says Gemara, no, there are two psukim, but they're teaching two very different dinim. They're both talking about the tzara. Individual tzara. We don't need any pasuk for the erva, for sure it's forbidden. They're both to do with tzara. One is to tell you when the tzara is forbidden, and one is to tell you when the tzara is permitted, and goes as follows. Chad lemeisa tzara, one is to come to forbid tzara. When is that? In the case of the mitzvah of yibum, since you're not allowed to marry your wife's sister, nor can you marry the co-wife. The makah mitzvah, where there's a mitzvah. But the chad lemisha, the other comes to permit. Tzara shalayva makah mitzvah. Let's say if your son-in-law is married to your daughter and happens to have a co-wife, no yibum, no mitzvah of yibum there when your son-in-law passes away, then you're allowed to marry, you personally are allowed to marry the co-wife. And therefore, that's what he's telling you, that the tzara sometimes is permitted where there is no mitzvah, like in case of your son-in-law. Because it says an extra pasuk, the yibma, that only with this yibum involved is there a problem with the tzara, but there's no mitzvah of yibum involved, go ahead and marry the tzara. Says the Gemara, my time, and this is how we learn it. Said the part of a yibum, it could have should have said the yibum. Instead of a yibum, you should marry her. There's a mitzvah yibum. So we dash as follows: the mokum yibum udasira tzarash. When is a tzara forbidden? If there's a yibum, shaloi mokum yibum shayisa, but there's no yibum, the tzara is permitted. So therefore, there's no pasuk here teaching you the erva that we know. The two psukim the Rebbe is talking about, one is coming to forbid and one is coming to permit. Mitzvah is forbidden, not mitzvah permitted. Now the Gemara will continue on that. We have a mission to support Rav that we don't need a pasuk for erva. No, nothing to do with your wife's sister, because that's obvious. Now, marry even by mitzvah. It says in our Mishnah, Chomesh Esrei Noshim, 15 women, Paitres Tzarasein. They exempt the co-wives from getting married to their brother-in-law. What do you mean? First, the Mishnah should have said they themselves don't marry, because we would have thought that they do because of the mitzvah of Yibum, and they exempt their co-wives. The Mishnah doesn't talk about them. Because that's obviously, it's obvious. They look to the support. They don't say that they're exempt and they part of the other one. Shvamina is approved. Says the Gemara, so let's understand. What's your whole premise? You know why erva delayed sich? You don't need a pasuk to tell you don't marry your wife's sister because it's obvious. This is a loises that is kares. Krod ain't acid but kares. That's the reason why. What do you call it? It's Torah nami loite boy kra for the Torah as well. You don't need a pasuk. Why? Because now that it says litzroi, once the pasuk says litzroi, therefore litzroi means the co-wife as well. That means it says that don't marry the sister of your wife litzroi, which means also litzroi we said before it's in plural to teach you that her co-wife, if you're the wife of your sister is married to your brother, the co-wife is forbidden as well, which means the Torah is including the co-wife of your sister-in-law, your wife's sister, in the Isser of your wife's sister. In other words, there's a chorus there as well. So if you don't need a pasuk to tell you that even though there's a mitzvah of yibum, don't marry your wife's sister because there's a loisa yesh b'kares, so too there's a loisa yesh b'kares for the co-wife. We learn that from the literature. So now I'm the same reason so the question goes back. Why, if you don't need a pasuk for your sister-in-law because you get chorus, why would you think you permitted? Nor can you need a pasuk for your sister-in-law's co-wife because she's included in the same chorus. Because in the same pasuk it says litzroy, which is reveal rivalry, and we say it says in plural, say lotzroy, which would mean only to your wife and her sister, but also litzroy in plural, including her co-wife. So we're asking a question of Rabbi. This is what Rabbi said. You're right. In fact, the Torah also doesn't need a pasuk for the very same reason you just said. You don't need a pasuk. So what do you need a pasuk for? You know when you need Allah to tell you, but where there's no mitzvah of yibum, let's say your wife's sister was married to a stranger, and there's no mitzvah of yibum, then the co-wife is permitted. Otherwise, we would have thought, just like your wife's sister is always forbidden to you, maybe your wife's sister's co-wife, regardless of her situation, then is always forbidden to you. So he says, no, only when there's a mitzvah of yibum is your wife's sister's co-wife forbidden. But there's no mitzvah of yibum. No, when it comes to your wife's sister, it doesn't matter if it's a mitzvah of yibum or not. You can never marry your wife's sister while your wife is alive. It doesn't matter who she was married to. But it comes to your wife's sister's co-wife. When is it forbidden? Only if they were married to your brother-in-law, whether there's a mitzvah of yibum and left child. If there was no mitzvah of yibum, there's no issue to the co-wife. So that's what we need the pasuk Allah, actually to be, not to be stricter, but to be lenient, to enable her to marry your wife's sister's co-wife, where there's no mitzvah of yibum. Ki yitzakor, no, the pasuk for. Permit a tzara where there's no mitzvah. My time, how do we know that? How do we know from the pasuk? Omakra. The pasuk says, where there's a mitzvah of yibum, not only shouldn't you marry your wife's sister, nor should you marry your wife's sister's co-wife. The makam maleu, that's it. Only when is the co-wife forbidden, where there's a mitzvah of yibum. But shalai b'makam maleu, where there's no mitzvah of yibum, shaya, it is permitted. So that's how we explain Rava. So it's not even coming to us or anything, because that's obvious. It's coming to be matter, to permit. The pasuk follows according to you. Let's say that if you're going to matter the co-wife, even though the co-wife is forbidden to you, and there's chorus if she's married to your brother-in-law, but you want to tell me that the co-wife is permitted to be married to a stranger, so maybe the same thing applies to your wife's sister, because they're both in the same pasuk. If your wife's sister's co-wife is permitted with no mitzvah yibum, maybe your wife's sister is permitted to you also with no mitzvah yibum. So one to say your wife's sister herself. This very passage that says you're not allowed to marry your wife's sister uses the word alel. So why don't we dash? And when are you not allowed to marry your wife's sister? Where there's a mitzvah yibum, but when there's no mitzvah yibum, she's married to somebody else, whatever it is. Go ahead and marry her, just like you can marry the co-wife. Or mitzvah should be permitted. So it doesn't make sense. Doesn't, if there's a mitzvah to marry Yibum, but because she's your wife's sister, we don't know if you prevent it from happening. So when there's no mitzvah Yibum, you can allow it to marry your wife's sister. What's the logic in that? So isn't a logical thing that you cannot marry your wife's sister in all circumstances? The Marka mitzvah, you tell me with the mitzvah Yibum, even though it's a mitzvah, I'm not allowing you to marry your wife's sister because of that prohibition. Asida, so Marka mitzvah, but there's no mitzvah Yibum. Shari, you want to permit it? Doesn't make sense. So Gemara jumps back right away. And the co-wife is the same situation. The co-wife is forbidden, your wife's sister's co-wife is forbidden to you if there's a mitzvah yibum. But there's no mitzvah yibum is permitted. Why don't you use the same kavachayim? Where there's a mitzvah, it's forbidden, where there's no mitzvah, you're allowed to. Does that make sense? What do you mean? What you just said doesn't make sense. Because look at the co-wife. The b'makom mitzvah, if your wife's sister is married to your brother, the co-wife is forbidden to you, asida. But a shaloimag mitzvah, if your wife's sister is married to a stranger, and the co-wife of that marriage is permitted to you. How can that be? B'makom mitzvah. On Malay, he said back to him, you want to know the difference between a co-wife and your wife's sister? Why your co-wife is permitted when there's no mitzvah and your sister is not. We have a pasuk regarding your wife's sister that she's another pasuk that says she's always forbidden by you. It says in the pasuk it says in the end of the pasuk, you shouldn't take your wife's sister litzrei, which we learn out of co-wife, because the galus avasa, you're going to reveal her intimacy. Allah on her, that we said is talking about mitzvah yibum bechayeha, while your wife is alive. So clearly the pasuk said you can never marry your wife's sister while your wife is still alive. In all circumstances, whether there's a mitzvah, there's no mitzvah, it's always forbidden. And that chayah is only referring to your wife's sister, not referring to your wife's sister's co-wife. So your wife's sister co-wife is limited to Allah only when there's a mitzvah it's forbidden, when there's no mitzvah it's permitted. But regarding your wife's sister, it says b'chayeha, which means as long as your wife's alive, she's forbidden. Says Gemara, what are you talking about? We needed to tell you, but after your wife died, she's permitted. So we needed no longer extra. So therefore, you're telling me, come and tell you, where there's no mitzvah, you're not allowed to marry your wife's sister. No, maybe when there's no mitzvah, you're not allowed to marry your wife's sister. Maybe when there's no mitzvah, you are allowed to marry your wife's sister. Is coming to teach you another thing altogether. It's coming to teach you that if your wife is dead, if your wife passed away, you can go ahead and marry your wife's sister, where there's a mitzvah. But if there's no mitzvah, it's always permitted. So no. The chayah is coming to tell you that your wife's sister is always forbidden to you, even when there's no mitzvah. And how do we know then the other did that once your wife passes away, you're allowed to marry a sister? From another pasuk. That's from the beginning of the pasuk, where it says isha elachoisa, that you should not, that a woman and her sister, that means the woman is still your woman. You're still married to you at the time. Says the Gemara, no, it's not good enough. I would have thought as long as it's your wife, it's forbidden. What about if you divorce your wife? Can you marry that a sister? We would have thought so, yes. And therefore we need b'chayah, as long as she's alive, you can't. Of course, as long as your wife is alive, even if she's no longer your wife, you're not allowed to marry a sister unless your ex-wife passed away. So the question goes back. How do we know if you're going to tell me that the Rebbe's second half of the pasuk is coming to tell you that your sister's wife's co-wife is permitted to you with no mitzvah? Then why did we also say that your wife's sister is permitted to you also when there's no mitzvah? I'll tell you how. Today, there are actually two parts of the pasuk. See, even the first part of the pasuk says, "Isha ela choisa," your wife and her sister leisikach. You should not marry litzra, including her co-wife. That's the first half of the pasuk, right? So it includes everybody, includes your wife's sister, and includes also the co-wife. But then it says legales ervosa. So that's two people. But then it says legales ervosa. I don't want you to reveal her erva, which is singular. We're talking about one person. The chodem mashma. What's going on here? First, you start off saying that two people are forbidden to you, your wife's sister plus her co-wife, and then you say legalis ervosa, which means one person is forbidden to you. How's that working out? Okay, so this is how we learn. Mitzvah, when there's a mitzvah yibum, then stay in asud is that both asur, your wife's sister, and also the co-wife. But shaloi b'malka mitzvah, where there's no mitzvah involved, then there's an isa to one of them. Which one? Legalis ervosa. Yeah, I don't want you to reveal her sorry. Shaloi b'malka mitzvah, where there's no malka mitzvah. He asura. If there's no mitzvah, one of them is asur. So we're going to say the cause of that, which is your wife's sister. But sarasa, the co-wife, is muteres. So that's how we know. Because the pasuk has two parts. The first part is two people. The second part is one person. So the first part, two people are forbidden. That's when there's a mitzvah yibum. The second part, where it says only one person is forbidden, it's when there's no mitzvah yibum. Your wife's sister is asur, but the co-wife is permitted. Says the Gemara, maybe the other way around. Why don't we learn the other way around as follows? The Malka mitzvah, where there's a mitzvah, he asura, then say only one is asur. And Torah muteres. Because the word Allah is coming to tell you, remember, Allah is written, the word Allah is written right after the words legalis ervos. Allah is the mitzvah of Yibam. So say the other way around. The mitzvah of Yibam Allah could be compared to Allah, was said by Yevamos Daf. The mitzvah of Yibam Allah is only when by one person, which is your wife's sister, but the co-wife is permitted. But where there's no mitzvah, it's different. They're both permitted. The Malka mitzvah, only one person is asur. If it's a rasa muteris, but a shalayva Malka mitzvah, if there's no mitzvah, then maybe shtein asuras. That's when they're both asur. Where there's a mitzvah, so the mitzvah said, look, you got to do something. You cannot marry your wife's sister, but marry the wife's sister co-wife. But if there's no mitzvah, don't marry any of them. Because in fact, the word Allah is written right where it says legalis ervasa in singular. So say that's how it works. That's how it works. If that's the pshat, that they're both forbidden to you when stop, and by mitzvah only one, lo yomer Allah. Because don't say the word Allah. Even if you don't say the word Allah, we're going to ask a question. Two parts of the pasuk. The first part of the pasuk says they're both forbidden. They're both forbidden. And then it says the galas of us only one is forbidden. And then logically we're going to say as follows. Look, where there's a mitzvah, there's more grounds to say that it's permitted. So we're going to say when is it one and when is it two. So we're going to say that when there's a mitzvah, one is also, but one is permitted. We got to do the mitzvah. The co-wife should be permitted. When there's no mitzvah, neither of them should be permitted. I don't need to Allah to tell me that. Because it says Allah comes to tell you that no. That the wife, when there's a mitzvah, they're both forbidden. When there's no mitzvah, one is forbidden and one is permitted. That means the wife is forbidden, but the co-wife is permitted. Saying what Rav Kana, she comes along Rav Ashi, we're still continuing exploring Rava, comes along Rav Ashi and asks Rav Kana, how do you know that the high Allah Yisuda? So you decided Allah means when there's a mitzvah of Yibam, it's Asur, but it says the galas of Asur, one is Asur. And then each is two, and we try to work out which is which. So we said that when there's a mitzvah, they're both asur. When there's no mitzvah, only one of them is asur. How do you know that the two are both asur? Maybe the two are both permitted. Says the Gemara, the higher level, the higher the word is the isa. Maybe the other way around. Maybe the other way around. When there's a mitzvah, they're both permitted. When there's no mitzvah, that's when your wife's sister is forbidden, but a co-wife is permitted. Or both permitted. You should not marry either one, not your wife's sister nor the co-wife. When there's no mitzvah, then you're not allowed to marry your wife's sister, but no, she marries co-wife. There's no mitzvah, then why do it? Where there's a mitzvah, maybe stay with Taurus. Maybe they're both permitted because there's a mitzvah. That makes sense. The pasuk says legalis ervasa, which we just finished explaining that one of them is asur, and the way you're explaining it, there's never a case of a single person asur. Either they're both asur, which is when there's no mitzvah, and either they're both permitted when there is a mitzvah. In Cain legalis ervasa the chada heich mishkachla when they find only one. Even makam mitzvah shtein with Taurus, if there's a mitzvah they're both permitted, and you should like makam mitzvah shtein with Taurus, they're both asur. So therefore, what you said doesn't make sense. So bottom line is, what did Rava say? Rava says that the Allah is not coming to tell you that your wife's sister is forbidden. We don't need Allah. It's obvious. We don't even need a letter to tell you that your wife's sister's is mitzvah yibum is forbidden. So it's obvious since the Torah includes her with your wife's sister that a co-wife is forbidden as a loisah as chorus. Then obviously even the mitzvah yibum cannot push it away. You need a letter to make it lenient to tell you that when is your co-wife forbidden? Only when there's a mitzvah yibum. When there's no mitzvah yibum, the co-wife is permitted. So that's what a letter comes to teach you. Nothing to do with anything we learned before. So now that we brought up Rebbe, we're going to analyze Rebbe a little bit further because Rebbe is the one who said that it could have said v'lokach, it said l'kach, it could have said v'yibam, it says v'yibma, and we said it comes to tell you that it comes to the way he read it is one is to asa your wife's sister, one is to asa the tzara, and we said no, it only comes to really asa the tzara of your wife's sister. And then we said at the end we said no. One is coming to tell you that the tzara is forbidden, and one is coming to tell you that the tzara is permitted. When there's a mitzvah, the tzara is forbidden. But when there's no mitzvah, that what the yibma, only when there's a mitzvah, she's forbidden. But if there's no mitzvah, then your wife's sister's co-wife is permitted. Now the more we'll analyze that gufa, let us analyze what Rebbe said. Rebbe said, "V'lokach shus v'lokach." To teach you, this is what Rebbe said. That what only this person lasted to forbid tzarayis, the co-wife, the arayis, and your wife's sister. Says the Gemara, midday tzaras ksiva. Where does this pasuk? This is not the pasuk that talks about litzra. This is a pasuk that two brothers, the brothers sat down together. One of them died, childless. This woman cannot get married to any strange person. That Yevamos Daf, she should marry one of the brother-in-law. And then the pasuk says, he should take her as a wife, the yibma, and marry her. So where does tzara come in here? What's everybody talking about tzara here? Midei tzarek sivacha. What is it tzaras? In fact, where do we learn tzaras from? A different pasuk altogether. We learn tzaras from your wife's sister, where it says a woman and your wife and her sister don't marry litzra. And we said the word litzra. Sure said lotzar. Litzra teacher that it expands the isa, including co-wife. Nothing to do with the pasuk Rebbe brought. Va'oid tzara is melitza nafka. And also, you Rebbe using the word tzaras over here to teach you to tell you because of Yibam, to tell you that the Sarah is also we learn from another pasuk. So now we have two questions. First of all, we learn we learn Sarah from another pasuk, not from here. Don't talk about Sarah. Second of all is we have another pasuk. What do you do with that pasuk? So now we're going to answer question number two. The answer is Litzra mapikle Rebbe Rab Shimon. You know what he does with pasuk with Litzra to teach the din of Rab Shimon. Now, what in the world is din of Shimon, which we'll learn later on? There were three brothers, Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. And Reuven was married to Shimon's daughter. So then Reuven was married to Shimon's daughter. When Reuven passes away, then obviously Shimon is out of the picture because he not only cannot marry Reuven's, Shimon, his daughter, he cannot marry the co-wife either. So what happened was like this. This is the case. There were two sisters, right? Or a mother, let's say two sisters is an easier case. Two sisters married to Reuven and Shimon. And what happened was both Reuven and Shimon died. So now Levi has to marry. He can marry one of the two sisters he can marry because he's not related to them, but he cannot marry both sisters. Now each one is called zikr. Remember we learned in the beginning, we mentioned in the beginning that when the brother dies, the person whose child has died, immediately there's an attachment, a zikr. There's an attachment between the widows and the brothers-in-law. And since the Torah says not marry the sister of your wife, nor can you marry the sister of your zikah. The Rabban case says if you're married already, so cannot marry. So he cannot marry both wives, and not only that, he can't marry either one because each one of them is a sister of the woman that is tied to him. It's called a zikah, and therefore a zikah is considered as if you're already partially married, and so you can't marry either one. So what do you do in this case? But you're not really married to them. So we don't let you marry. Instead, we say, you know what? You got to give a chalitza, because it's not. You're not really. She's not. Neither of them are really married to you to say, look, it's a sister of your wife, and therefore they're totally exempt. Because not really married yet. So they're still tied to you. But we treat it also that so they're still the mitzvah to marry. And on the other hand, we say they're a little bit tied to you. So therefore, we say, you know what? We don't want you to get married because it doesn't look right. And Rabbanan is definitely the sister of your supposedly wife. So therefore, you get a chalitza. But Rab Shimon said you don't even need a chalitza. And how does he know? Because it says in the pasuk melitzror that at the moment that they both become saras to each other, that what these two sisters now suddenly are bound up to the same man, to Levi, through this attachment. you cannot marry either of them. As if the Torah is alluding to this particular case, and therefore not only don't you have Yibum, you don't even have Chalitza. That's what he used the Pasuk Litzra. So therefore, never use it for that as well. So the same question, not a question, you want to know what to do Litzra? To teach you that Shimon did. But the first question, where did you learn Tzara in this Pasuk? Always I mentioned Tzara. Says Gemara, Tzara, Hachiksiv. Where did it say Tzara? I'll tell you how it says Tzara. He says here, Heichaksiv, Hachikama. Im Kain, if so, Lemakra, the Torah should have said, Velokach. Not Lekocha, take her, just say Velokach, take. My Lekocha. What do you mean, Lekocha? To teach you, when it says Lekocha, sounds like there are two available, but take one. And the Torah said, only take one of them and not take both of them. And this is what we learn. As long as you can choose one, they're both available, and you can choose either one, then you have a mitzvah yibum. But if you cannot choose either one, you can choose either one, but choose only one. But if you cannot choose either one, because one of them is let's say, is your wife's sister, then you don't have the mitzvah yibum for either one. That's the way he dashes. What do you mean, lekacha, take her alone? You have a choice of taking two, but you're not allowed to take both wives. Take only one, but you have to be able to choose both. As long as both of them are available to you, if I have a choice to marry either one, Shai is permitted to marry then whichever one you choose, but only one. But if you cannot choose both of them, because one of them happens to be your wife's sister, then neither can you marry the other one. So that's how I learned, says Rebbe, that this pasuk is talking about tzara. From the very word lekach. And the Yibma tells you b'makom Yibam. And the Yibma tells you, remember we learned before, to be meant to be matter. That only when there's a mitzvah are you not allowed to marry your wife's sister's co-wife. B'makom Yibam who dasir tzara, or b'shalei b'makom if there's no mitzvah, then even though if she's the co-wife of somebody that's also to you, if let's say to your son-in-law, no problem. Then no mitzvah Yibam, then there's no problem. B'makom Yibam shayir tzara, but there's no mitzvah, then you're allowed to. The Rabbanon who learned Sarah for the pasuk Litzra, what do they do with the pasuk Lekacha? The Rabbanon, what do they do with it? The boy they need for the Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina. The Amar Rabbi Chanina said, "Lekacha." What does Lekacha mean? Teach you that take this sister-in-law as a wife, and the moment you marry her, she becomes completely your wife, and all the previous baggage is gone. In what respect? That if tomorrow you decide to divorce her, you can divorce her. You don't have to give her chalitza anymore. Once you become your wife, she's no longer Yevama. She's your wife. And therefore, if tomorrow you divorce her, you don't just give her a chalitza anymore. Number one. Melamed shemegar shebeget. You can divorce her with divorce. You can divorce her, and if you divorce her with a get, and it's over. Not more than that. What happens a week later? You realize you made a mistake. You want to remarry her. So you can argue, look, you used up your mitzvah. She's still your brother's wife. It's forbidden to you. So you say no. The moment you married her, all her shackles are gone. She's no longer your brother's wife. She's your wife. And therefore, if you divorce her, you want to remarry her a week later, you can. Marzida, you can remarry her. That's what we do the word lekacha. And what do they do with the word v'yibma? What do they do with the word v'yibma? Because they learn out that the tzara, but there's no mitzvah. We learn from the pasuk litzra. So what do they do? And Rebbe used the word v'yibma to tell you where there's no mitzvah, you're allowed to marry your wife's sister's co-wife. They don't need it for that. So what do they do v'yibma? V'yibma al karcha. And even if she doesn't agree to marry you, if you force her to marry you, she's married to you. Says the Gemara, if you have relations with her against her will, she becomes your wife. But Rebbe, he uses the word lekacha to tell you it's your wife. How does he learn that halacha since he uses lekacha to teach you the din of tzara? The Rabbi Yossi, what does he learn with Chanina? As Gemara says, Isha nafka. He learns that from the fact that it says in the pasuk, take her lekacha loyli isha, take her as a wife. Clearly, it's your wife. I don't need lekacha for that, says Rebbe. Yibma, what is the Yibma? You have learned after sorry, al karcha. Where's you learn the din of al karcha? If the pasuk says the Yibma, that he goes ahead and marries as if it's totally his choice, that he goes ahead and marries her. But Rebbe, what in the world does Rebbe do with this Allah? What does he do with Allah? Right? Since he does not use that pasuk, Allah will tell you where there's a mitzvah, the co-wife forbidden, where there's no mitzvah, she's permitted. He learns it from here, from lekacha and the yibma, that where there's a mitzvah, she's forbidden, the co-wife. Where there's no mitzvah, it's not permitted. What does it allow? So we need to look at Tanya, which we're going to learn tomorrow. We use Allah for a whole different limud, nothing to do with anything about women. It has to do with about people who bring a carbon if they made a mistake. When do you bring a carbon? Everything that we learned in this week's parsha, or in the last week's parsha, the end. And the shlach. Okay, we'll continue tomorrow, everybody. So should we start learning on